Buddhist teachings and stories for letting go at night, there is a kind of heaviness that has nothing to do with the body. You know the one. It settles somewhere behind the eyes, or low in the chest, or at the back of the throat where words wait and don't quite form. It comes at night, when the room is finally quiet and the tasks of the day have run out of reasons to keep moving. And in that quiet it arrives, the wait. It might be shaped like a conversation that did not go the way you hoped. It might carry the face of something unfinished, something postponed, something that has not yet arrived or has already gone and left its impression behind like a stone lifted from soft ground. It might not have a shape at all, only a pressure, a density, a sense that the mind is holding something it cannot quite set down. Perhaps it arrived with you today. Perhaps it has been with you for years, so familiar by now that you have stopped noticing its presence, the way you stopped noticing the hum of the house, the slight weight of a ring worn long enough that it has become part of the hand. For thousands of years, Buddhist teachers and Zen masters have sat with this exact feeling, in dim rooms, on cold mountainsides, beside rivers that did not care how much any of them were carrying. They sat with the heaviness and looked at it, carefully, with the particular patience of people who have decided that looking is worthwhile. And again, across centuries and traditions and languages, they arrived at the same gentle astonishment. The weight they found is made of nothing. Not nothing as in unimportant, not nothing as in it does not hurt, or that the things that have shaped the weight are not real, but nothing as in, when you reach into the center of the heaviness and look for what is actually there, you find only thought, memory, anticipation, the echo of a voice, a story the mind told itself so many times it forgot it was only a story, a worry held in the same position for so long it has taken on the texture of fact. Tonight we will sit with that discovery together. We will travel as we always do through old stories. Stories about people who carried stones they did not need to carry, who argued with weather that did not listen, who chased ships on the ground until someone helped them see what they were actually chasing. And somewhere in the traveling, somewhere in the long and unhurried movement through these old parables, it is possible that the weight, this weight that feels so certain, so real, so solid, might begin to reveal what it is actually made of. And what it is made of is air. Welcome all of you who are here tonight. Whether this is the first time you have found this place or whether you have been here many times before, we are glad you are with us. There is no preparation required. There is no correct state to be in when you arrive. You are welcome exactly as you are, carrying whatever you are, carrying tired in whatever particular way today has made you tired, ready or not quite ready, here. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. Perhaps you are in bed already, the room dark, the covers pulled up around you. Perhaps you are in a chair somewhere quiet, or lying on a floor with a single lamp still on. Wherever you are, that place is the right place. You do not need to set anything down before you join us. We will look at what we are carrying together, gently over the course of the evening. There is a thought experiment that some Buddhist teachers have offered to students who come to them overwhelmed. They ask the student to imagine holding a stone, not a large stone, just an ordinary one, smooth, river-worn, the kind that fits exactly in the palm with a small, satisfying weight. And they ask the student to grip it, not tightly, but deliberately, to hold it with intention, as though letting go might mean losing something. Now hold it, the teacher says. How heavy does it feel? The student reports. Not very heavy. A stone like this weighs almost nothing. Now hold it for 1 hour. At the end of the hour, the hand is beginning to cramp. The forearm aches in a particular way. The shoulder has been recruited without permission to help with the holding. Now hold it for 1 day. The student cannot quite imagine this, but the teacher helps. They describe the way the hand would first ache, then go numb at the edges, the way the arm would begin to tremble, with small involuntary tremors as the muscles exhausted themselves, the way the body would recruit every available system, spine, hip, core, to compensate for this small, simple, unmoving weight. The way, by the end of 1 full day, a stone the size of a palm would have colonized the entire body, would have made itself the center of every thought, would have become the dominant experience of being alive. The stone does not change, the teacher says. It weighs exactly the same in the first moment as it does in the last. What changes is how long we have been holding it. Tonight's stories are about this, about the things we carry, not because they are heavy, but because we have been holding them for such a long time that we have forgotten we are holding them at all. About the strange moment, quiet, sometimes almost funny, sometimes accompanied by a specific kind of relief that feels almost like embarrassment, when a person looks down at their hands and realizes what is in them, and realizes also that the act of releasing it requires no great effort, only noticing the weight of our worries, our regrets, our fears about tomorrow, and our replaying of yesterday. These things feel solid. They press against us from the inside. They make themselves real through sheer repetition. The thought returning and returning and returning until the mind accepts it as furniture rather than visitor, until the mind stops even registering it as an object because it has become part of the room itself. But they are not furniture. And tonight, across 5 old stories, we will travel alongside 5 different people as they arrive, each in their own way, each in their own time, at the same simple truth, that the weight they were carrying was made of nothing, that the letting go required no force, that the hand, when they finally looked at it, was already open. Let us begin. Let us explore a story about a monk who carried what he did not need. His name was Brother Ananda, and he lived in a small stone monastery at the edge of a mountain range whose peaks were so high they disappeared for months, at a time into clouds so thick they appeared from below to be solid. The monastery sat at the foot of the range, beside a cold river that descended from the glaciers above, running jade green in spring and iron gray in winter. And the monks who lived there were simple men who grew vegetables, copied texts, and walked the mountain paths in the early mornings as a form of moving meditation. Brother Ananda was not yet old, but he was not young either. He had been at the monastery for 11 years, which was long enough to know the name of every stone in the courtyard, and short enough to still wonder, sometimes in the evenings after the last bell, whether he was living the right life. This wondering was not acute. It did not consume him, but it was present, the way a faint sound is present in a quiet room. There, when you stop to listen, undetectable when you are busy. It was perhaps this wondering that had made him, over those 11 years, a collector, not of objects exactly. Brother Ananda did not own many things. What he collected were responsibilities, concerns. He had a gift, which was also a kind of burden, for noticing what was unresolved in the world around him, and feeling instinctively that the resolution of it was somehow his to carry. When the winter stores ran low one November, he was the one who lay awake in his narrow bed, calculating the mathematics of rice and salt and dried mushrooms, working through the numbers again and again, as though the counting itself were a form of protection. When a younger monk struggled visibly with the loneliness of the novitiate, the silent meals, the structured hours, the distance from family, Ananda spent his evenings rehearsing conversations that might help, turning the words over in his mind, testing them against imagined responses, preparing for exchanges that sometimes happened and sometimes did not. When the abbot fell ill one autumn with a fever that came and went for 6 weeks, Ananda took on 3 of his duties without being asked, and then a 4th, and began waking earlier to ensure the morning prayers were organized, and then began worrying in the afternoons about whether all of this was enough. He was, in the quiet assessment of the other monks, a good man, genuinely kind, genuinely devoted, also always visibly tired. One spring, the abbot announced that the monks would walk the old pilgrimage path, a 3-day journey through the high mountain passes to a temple on the far side of the range. This path had been walked by the monks of the monastery for more than 200 years, following routes that had been established even longer ago by traders and shepherds who had long since stopped using them. It was tradition. It was also, as anyone who had completed it would tell you, extremely steep in sections and bitterly cold at altitude, with stretches of loose rock and wind that arrived without warning and with a temperature that felt personal. Brother Ananda prepared with great care. He laid out his pack the evening before and filled it with everything he thought he might need. Warm layers, extra food in case someone's rations ran short, a medical kit assembled from what he could gather from the monastery's small supply room, a spare set of sandals, his own in case another monk's broke in the passes, a length of rope in case of emergency on the steep sections, a small toolkit for repairing shoulder straps and buckles on packs, a second blanket because the first might not be sufficient in the high passes where people had frozen in less severe conditions, a set of texts he had been meaning to study for 3 months, but had not found the time for. This seemed like an opportunity, a journal because something important, always seemed to happen on the pilgrimage, and he had never written it down. A lamp, extra lamp oil, a small pot in case the monastery at the other end did not have enough for all of them. By the time he was finished, his pack weighed approximately as much as a moderately large child. On the morning of the departure, Brother Ananda hoisted the pack onto his shoulders and tilted sideways. He recovered. He adjusted the straps. He told himself, with the particular optimism of a person who has already committed to something, that this would be fine. It was not immediately fine. By mid-morning of the first day, he was 20 minutes behind the rest of the group. The path rose steeply through pine forest, and the pack bore down on his shoulders with the focused attention of something that intended to remain. His back, which had never troubled him, was making its presence known in a new and specific way. His knees, on the downslopes, had begun to communicate in a language he did not welcome. The other monks, carrying their small, simple packs, each containing a change of robe, a bowl, a blanket, the prescribed items from the departure list, waited for him at each rest point with expressions of warm concern that he found, despite himself, slightly difficult to receive. On the morning of the second day, the abbot himself fell back from the group and walked alongside him. They went in silence for a good while, as they often did. The abbot was not a man who felt compelled to fill silence with sound, which was one of the things that made him restful company. Then, quietly, the abbot said, "What are you carrying, Ananda?" Ananda listed the contents of the pack, carefully, completely, with the faint pride of a thorough person describing a thorough preparation. The extra blanket, the medical kit, the rope, the tools, the texts, the pot. The abbot nodded slowly. Around them, the mountain was enormous and very quiet, the kind of quiet that contains other sounds, wind in rock, water moving somewhere below, the occasional percussion of a small stone dislodged from somewhere above. "And which of these?" the abbot asked gently. "Did we ask you to bring?" Ananda thought. The departure list had been specific. Food, water, warm layer, bowl, blanket, sandals. Simple, clear. The food, he said. The warm layer. The sandals. The bowl and blanket. "Yes," said the abbot. "And the rest." "I thought," Ananda said carefully, "that someone might need them." The abbot stopped walking. He stood very still for a moment, looking at the mountains around them, at their enormous indifference, their patient height, the way they had been doing exactly what mountains do, regardless of who walked through them or what those people were carrying. Then he looked at Brother Ananda, at the tired face, at the careful eyes, at the goodness there, and also, unmistakably, the exhaustion. "Ananda," he said quietly, "do you believe that if you do not carry the weight, no one will?" This question settled into the air between them like something that had been looking for a place to land. Ananda opened his mouth, closed it. Did he believe that? Not consciously, no. He had never thought it in those terms. But as he considered the question, as he turned it over honestly, the way he had turned over so many things in those 11 years of wondering, he felt something clarify, that had been unclear for a long time. Some part of him did believe exactly that. Some part of him was convinced, below the level of words, that if he did not carry the rope, there would be no rope when the rope was needed. That if he did not worry about the blankets, someone would be cold. That if he did not hold the concern in his chest, where he could feel it, could be reminded of it at any moment, the concern would fall to the ground and shatter on the path, and nothing would be safe. As if worry were the same as care, as if wait were the same as love. The abbot waited with the patience of someone who has time. I think, Ananda said finally, slowly, that somewhere, without knowing it, I do believe that. The abbot nodded, without judgment, the way a person nods when something they already suspected has been confirmed. Set the pack down, he said. Ananda looked at him. Just for a moment, the abbot said. Set it against that rock there. Let's see what happens. Ananda removed the pack. He set it against a large boulder at the side of the path. He straightened and felt his spine adjust, vertebra by vertebra, like a building slowly remembering its own structure. He rolled his shoulders. The sensation was so immediate and so specific that he made a small involuntary sound. He breathed. The mountains, as far as he could see, remained in their positions. The path ahead continued. The other monks, far above on the switchbacks, were still walking. The river somewhere below was still conducting its patient conversation with the stones of the stream. Nothing that the pack had been holding up continued to require holding. The abbot smiled, not with satisfaction at having made a point, but with something gentler than that. The smile of someone who has watched this particular discovery arrive in someone they care for. The mountain, he said, was never asking for your help. They left most of the contents of the pack beside that boulder, redistributed the essential weight between themselves, simply, without drama, and walked on. Brother Ananda arrived at the temple on the other side of the range on the evening of the third day, in the blue hour before full dark, when the sky had that particular quality it sometimes has after a clear, cold day, transparent, very deep. The first stars already visible, although the light had not fully left. He sat down in the courtyard of the temple and did not move for a long time, and he noticed something in his chest that it took until morning to properly identify. Not happiness exactly, not relief exactly, something quieter than either, something that felt like having put down, not a pack, but the long habit of believing that the carrying was the same thing as the caring, that the weight was the same thing as the love. The mountain had carried itself. It always had. Let us pause here for a moment. There is no need to do anything with what you just heard. Let it settle where it has landed. Somewhere in you, in whatever part of you, recognize something in Brother Ananda's particular kind of goodness and his particular kind of exhaustion. Perhaps somewhere in you there is a pack that has been on your shoulders for a long time, not stones and rope, but preparations for disasters that have not arrived, worries held carefully in position so they do not escape, concerns carried because somewhere below the level of words You believe that carrying them is the same as addressing them. You do not need to do anything about this right now. Only perhaps notice that the weight is there. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about a cloud who made a very understandable mistake. In a valley between two great mountain ranges, the kind of valley that catches weather, the way a cupped hand catches water, holding it longer than the surrounding landscape, there was a cloud who had been drifting for as long as she could remember. She had been rain once. She knew this the way all clouds know it, not as a memory with shape and detail, but as a kind of body knowledge, a warmth in the moving center of her that corresponded to the fact of having once been rivers and soil, and the inside of roots and the cold surface of glaciers before rising, before becoming this. The knowing of rain was like the knowing of home, recognizable without requiring explanation. But that was long ago. Now she drifted, pale and high, and watched the world below with the comfortable detachment of someone who does not stay anywhere long enough to become attached to any of it. One autumn, the winds stilled. This was unusual. The valley was ordinarily a place of movement, the upper currents pushing clouds eastward toward the lowlands, the lower currents pulling cool air from the passes in the north, everything in the valley existing in a state of perpetual gentle transit. No cloud stayed anywhere for very long. There was always somewhere the air was going. But that autumn, in the second week of October, the weather settled into a stillness so complete it seemed deliberate. The air thickened. The valley wrapped itself in a haze that was not quite fog and not quite clarity, a suspended middle state, everything slightly out of focus, the hills on the southern edge barely visible, and the cloud who had been drifting eastward simply stopped. She did not choose to stop. The wind that had been moving her simply ceased, and without it, she hung in the cold, bright air above the valley and waited, in the patient way of clouds, for whatever came next. A day passed, then 3, then a week, and the cloud, who had never stayed anywhere for more than a few hours at most, began to look at the valley below her with different eyes. She began to notice things. The way the river in the valley floor bent at a particular angle near the cluster of buildings that served as a village. A long, slow curve, like a thought reconsidering itself midway through. The pattern of fields, the dark ones that had been harvested, and the pale ones still holding their crops. The enormous grey mountain to the north of the valley, standing apart from its range, its upper slopes draped in dark forest, and its highest reaches wearing, even in October, the permanent white of ice. She noticed, after several days, that she was where the mountain was. Not on the mountain exactly, but in front of it, perhaps, or beside it. The perspectives from altitude were sometimes confusing. She occupied the space in the northern sky, where the mountain's peak usually appeared to the people in the valley below, and the mountain, patient, ancient, stone, unchanging, was simply there behind her, invisible to the village, because she was in the way. From below, what the people saw when they looked north was cloud, a cloud where the mountain usually was. The mountain had, apparently, disappeared. She found this remarkable, and then gradually something shifted. She was where the mountain was. The farmers were calibrating their directions by her shape. When the children pointed north to explain something to each other, they pointed at her. The old woman who had lived at the edge of the village for 70 years and had used the mountain's north peak as her reference for everything. The old woman was using her now as her reference. She was in the practical geography of the valley, the northern summit. This was new. This was interesting. And somewhere in the stillness of those October weeks, as the unchanging air held her in place day after day, she began to settle into this fact, to accommodate herself to it, to become, in some way she could feel but not precisely describe, a cloud who was also mountain-like, fixed, essential, a reference point, something the valley needed in order to know where it was. She felt solid. The wind returned on a Tuesday, unexpectedly, from the west. It was not a dramatic wind. It came steadily, moderately, with the patient persistence of a thing that does not need to hurry because it has no intention of stopping. And the cloud, who had been in place for 11 weeks, who had in that time become, in her own understanding of herself, a permanent feature of the northern sky, began to move, not quickly, not all at once. She drifted east slowly at first, and then, with the gathering ease of something that has been still too long and has forgotten how simple movement is. The valley opened up differently below her as she moved. New contours appeared. She passed over the forest she had been above for weeks and found herself over different forest, then over unfamiliar farmland, then over a set of low hills she had no memory of. She looked back over her own trailing eastern edge and saw, of course, as it had always been, the mountain, grey, enormous, patient, ancient, the permanent ice on its upper reach catching the afternoon light with perfect indifference to the question of whether or not she was there. It had not needed her to be itself. And the cloud, drifting east now, feeling in her center the gathering of something, the return of a density she recognized as the approach of rain, understood something that only a cloud could understand from the inside. She had not been wrong to stay. She had not been wrong to be seen, to be used as a reference, to serve the practical needs of the valley's geography for those 11 weeks. That had been real. That had been genuinely useful. The error had not been in the staying. The error had been in deciding that the staying was permanent. In building from the fact of being somewhere long enough to be useful there an entire identity, in mistaking a position for a nature, in becoming so certain of where she was that she had stopped being certain of what she was. Her nature was to drift, to gather, to fall as rain, to rise again, to drift. This was not a lesser nature than the mountain's endurance. It was not a failed attempt at permanence. It was the nature of clouds, which had always been this way, and which was exactly sufficient for what clouds are meant to do in the world. She fell as rain that afternoon, somewhere over a forest, far east of the valley, over trees whose names she did not know. She fell completely without resistance, each drop reaching some destination, a leaf, a stone, a river, the cold soil of the forest floor, and being fully there upon arrival, she fell the way things fall when they have stopped being afraid of falling. Let us pause here for a moment. The cloud's error is one we know from the inside. The identity that forms around a position, a role, a worry, a long-held version of ourselves, and hardens there without our noticing. The self that has been in one place long enough to forget that the place was never permanent. There is a lightness available in that, a kind of release from the work of being what we thought we needed to be. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about a man who spent the better part of a season pursuing something that was never ahead of him. His name was Tai Yang, and he was 43 years old, and he had the kind of mind that another person might call relentless. He preferred the word thorough. He was thorough about his work. He managed a small business importing cloth from the north, and the accounts were always precise, the relationships with his suppliers carefully tended, the problems addressed before they became crises. He was thorough about his family. 2 children who were, in the quiet assessment of people who knew them, genuinely kind people, which he knew had not happened by accident. He was thorough about his concerns. When he identified a problem, he stayed with it. He followed it. He turned it over until he understood it fully or until it resolved itself. And he had come, over 43 years, to trust this quality in himself. The difficulty, which he was only beginning to notice at 43, was that some things cannot be followed, or rather, some things that present themselves as problems are not, upon close examination, problems at all. They are simply the shapes that certain things make when light falls on them from a particular direction at a particular hour. The spring he turned 43, Tai Yang began to be preoccupied by his shadow, not in a way he could easily explain. He did not become afraid of it or believe it was anything other than what a shadow is. He was a practical man, and he understood the physics of shadows with perfect clarity. But understanding a thing and being at peace with it are not always the same. He first noticed it properly one evening, walking home from the market with the low afternoon light coming from behind his left shoulder. His shadow went ahead of him, stretched long by the angle of the sun, thin and exaggerated, the way shadows at that hour always are. And something about the shape of it caught his attention in a way he could not immediately account for. It looked like him and also unlike him. The elongation made him taller. The distortion made him thinner. The shadow's posture had a particular quality, a slight lean forward, a way of carrying the head that he recognized but had not quite seen in himself before, as though the shadow were showing him something. He walked faster, trying to close the distance. The shadow moved with him, maintaining its exact position ahead of him, with the perfect responsiveness of a thing that is, after all, not separate from him at all. He slowed. The shadow slowed. He stopped. The shadow stopped, lying flat and quiet on the road, going nowhere. He stood there for a moment in the late afternoon light, thinking. Over the weeks that followed, he found himself paying attention to the shadow in a way that he knew was disproportionate to the shadow's importance, and yet could not quite redirect. He noticed it at noon, when the sun was directly above, and the shadow disappeared almost entirely, contracted to a small dark pool around his feet, barely there. And during those minutes, he felt a specific, inexplicable lightness. He noticed it in the afternoons, when it stretched ahead again, long and impossible to catch. He did not tell his wife. She would have had reasonable things to say about it, and he was not yet ready for reasonable things. One afternoon in early summer, he walked to the old temple at the edge of the village, the one his mother had taken him to as a child, where the stone steps were worn smooth by centuries of feet, and the garden was kept by a monk, so old he seemed to have achieved a kind of geological patience. That monk was sitting in the garden when Tai Yang arrived. He was sitting on a stone bench that had been worn to a particular softness, doing nothing visible, in the specific way that people who have practiced doing nothing for 50 years are able to do nothing. Tai Yang sat on a nearby bench. The shadow fell eastward in the afternoon light, long and quiet. They sat together in silence for a while. Then the monk said, without apparent context, without looking up, "What are you trying to catch?" Tai Yang looked at him. "Could you tell?" "You have been sitting here for 20 minutes, the monk said mildly, with the expression of a man conducting a search. Tai Yang felt something relax in him slightly. "My shadow," he said. "I know how that sounds." The monk did not seem to find it sounded any particular way. "What troubles you about it?" "When I walk toward it," Tai Yang said, "it moves. I cannot reach it." "Yes," the monk said. "Shadows do that. I know that. I understand why, but I cannot seem to stop trying." The monk was quiet for a moment. Around them, the garden held its specific afternoon stillness. The smell of stone and old wood and some flowering thing Tai Yang could not identify. A bird moved somewhere in the branches of a plum tree along the wall, settled, went quiet. "Tell me," the monk said, "what does the shadow look like when you stop walking?" Tai Yang thought about this carefully. "It stops. It lies there, on the ground, still. And does it look like you?" "Yes. And when you look at it, then, when you are not chasing it, does it bother you?" Tai Yang looked at his shadow now, lying eastward on the paving stones of the garden, quiet and unremarkable, simply the shape his body made when afternoon light fell on him from the west. Did it bother him? Here, now, in the temple garden, not walking, not pursuing, just looking? It did not. It was, when he looked at it this way, simply a shadow. His shadow, neither revelatory nor threatening, neither a mystery nor a problem. The shape of him, made by light, lying quietly on the ground. "No," he said slowly. "When I stop, it doesn't bother me." The monk nodded, as though this confirmed something he had expected. "The bothering," he said, "is in the chasing." They sat with that for a while. Then the monk said, "Some things cannot be caught because they are not ahead of you. They are not ahead of you, and they are not behind you, and they are not beside you. They are you, made of the same substance, moving the same way, following the same laws. There is nowhere to go to be separate from them." Tai Yang walked home that evening as the sun moved into the western hills. His shadow went behind him now, following, rather than leading, long and cool. He did not look at it. He did not need to. He already knew what it looked like. And in the coming weeks, as he went about his work, the accounts, the suppliers, the family, the ordinary texture of a day, he found that the preoccupation had quieted, not because he had solved anything, only because someone had helped him see that the bothering was not in the shadow. The bothering was in the chasing. Let us pause here for a moment. What are you chasing tonight, in the dark hours, that moves whenever you move and stops when you stop? What is the thing you have been trying to reach that cannot be reached because it is not, in fact, ahead of you? Perhaps the thought you keep returning to, perhaps the version of a conversation that keeps restructuring itself in your mind, trying to come out right. Perhaps the worry that you know in the clear part of your thinking has no object, but that moves forward each time you approach it. The bothering is in the chasing. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about an old woman who discovered late in life that forgetting can be its own kind of grace. Her name was Sister Min, and she had been afraid of many things over the 81 years she had been alive. She had been afraid as a child of the dark, the specific dark of a house in which the lamps were out, which was different from the outdoor dark in ways that she had never quite been able to articulate, but had felt very clearly. She had been afraid of deep water, of the way still water holds its depth invisible. She had been afraid of certain kinds of silences, and of the sound of particular doors, and of the expression on her father's face when he was working through a difficult decision and had not arrived at it yet. As a young woman, she had been afraid of failing to be what people needed. This was a large and various fear with many rooms in it. She was afraid of disappointing her teachers, and then her students, and then the people who came to her with their questions and their troubles. She was afraid of saying the wrong thing, of offering the wrong teaching at the wrong moment, of sending someone in a direction that would not serve them. She was afraid of being found insufficient. Not through malice, not through negligence, but through the simple gap between what she knew and what was needed. She had been a teacher for more than 40 years, first in a village school where she taught children to read and to reason and to think about the world with some care. Then, in her middle years, in a small monastery where she had been asked to teach the younger monks philosophy, history, the texts, and the larger and less nameable thing that sits behind the texts and only sometimes agrees to be spoken. She was, by every reasonable measure, a good teacher. The monks she had taught were kind men who thought carefully and lived with some grace. The children from her village school had grown into capable adults who, when they returned to see her, were able to talk with her about what they were doing with their lives in terms that suggested some thread of continuity between the child she had taught and the person they had become. And yet she had never, in all those years, stopped being afraid, not cripplingly, not in a way that prevented her from functioning, but always there. The low background frequency of it, the constant monitoring. Have I done enough? Have I said the right thing? Is what I know sufficient? Does the weight I am carrying, the weight of responsibility for the people in my care, am I carrying it correctly? What happened to Sister Min happened gradually. The kindest things usually do. Somewhere in her mid-70s. The years had blurred pleasantly together by then. The way photographs left in sunlight gradually soften and lose their edges without losing their essential content. She began to forget. She was careful in the early stages of noticing this to assess what exactly she was forgetting. She had heard stories about the kinds of forgetting that take names, take faces, take the sequence of a life. That was not this. She still knew the monks in her care by name and by particular nature. She still moved through the texts with the confidence of someone who has lived inside them long enough to know which rooms are where. She remembered the chrysanthemum tea her mother made, the exact proportions, the dried plum added at the end. What she was forgetting, she eventually understood, was her worries. Not immediately, not all at once, but she would be in the middle of a worry, following its familiar path, the one she had walked many times, the route from concern to catastrophe and back again, and the thread would simply end, not cut, not resolved, just absent. She would look for it and find only the space where it had been, with the slight surprised relief of discovering that the pebble that has been in your shoe for an hour has fallen out without you noticing. She went to her own teacher when this began. He was very old by then, 94, speaking mostly in short sentences, finding most things quietly amusing in a way that she had come, over many decades, to recognize as a specific form of wisdom. I am forgetting my worries, she told him. Good, he said, but I may be forgetting something I need to hold, she said. He considered this with the mild attention he brought to everything. Has anything fallen yet? He asked. She thought about it. In the weeks since the forgetting had begun, had anything failed that should have been caught by the worrying? Had any of the monks in her care been harmed by her inattention? Had the things she had been worrying about arrived in worse forms because she had, for a time, forgotten to worry about them? No, nothing had fallen. Then what were you holding them for? The old monk asked. He was, it seemed, genuinely curious. Sister Min thought about this for a long time. She thought about it while she sat in the early mornings, and the worries arrived thinner now, easier to lose track of. She thought about it while she talked, and while she walked the grounds in the evenings, and while she lay in her narrow bed in the hour before sleep, and found that the hour before sleep was, increasingly, simply an hour before sleep, not the rehearsal room it had been for so many decades. What had she been holding the worries for? She arrived, eventually, at an answer. She had believed, below the level of words, in the deeper layer where beliefs live without declaring themselves, that the act of worrying was itself a form of doing something, that by holding the fear in her chest, by keeping it present and accessible, by not permitting herself the relief of releasing it, she was in some way addressing the thing the fear was about, as if attention to a danger were the same as protection against it, as if the fear, by existing in her body, were standing guard, as if worry were a sentinel. But the things she had worried about for 40 years had happened or not happened entirely on their own terms. They had unfolded according to their own natures and the natures of the people involved. None of them had consulted her fears before doing so. The fears had not prevented a single harm. The worries had not altered a single outcome. They had only added to every experience one additional experience, the experience of being afraid. And now that the fears were growing thin and forgettable, growing transparent in the way that things grow transparent when the mind stops reinforcing them with repetition, what she found beneath them was something she struggled for months to name. It had peace's texture. It had happiness's temperature. It was familiar in a way she could not place for a long time, and then one morning she placed it. It was what she felt in the few seconds after a worry resolved, the clean interval between concerns that she had always thought of as the pause, the brief empty space between one worry and the next. She had been living in that space now for months. It was very quiet there, and very spacious. At 81, Sister Min had more students than she had ever had in 40 years of teaching. They came to sit with her. They came, they said, to learn how to let things go. She always said the same thing. I did not learn. I forgot. There is an important difference. Learning requires effort and intention, and a clear sense of what is to be mastered. Forgetting simply happens in its own time when you stop adding your energy to the thing that is there. I did not work at this. I only gradually stopped renewing it, and it grew thin on its own, the way untended fires grow thin. I did not put it out. I only stopped feeding it. Then she made the chrysanthemum tea, and they sat together for a long time, and mostly no one said very much, and it was, without exception, enough. Let us pause here for a moment. The fears you are carrying tonight have not prevented a single thing they were intended to prevent. They have stood at their post, watchful and awake, for years in some cases, and the things they were guarding against arrived or did not arrive on their own schedule, without consulting the sentinels. What has the vigil been for? You do not have to answer this right now. You do not have to make yourself forget. Only perhaps notice what it would feel like if the worry, for just this evening, simply failed to renew itself, if it became for one night too thin to hold. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about a woman who spent 3 decades arguing with the weather, and what she found when she finally stopped. Her name was Tao, and she had the kind of attention that in another world might have made her an excellent scientist. She noticed things, small things, precise things, particular details that most people's attention moved past without stopping. She noticed when the onions in the garden were ready to harvest a day before they became obvious about it. She noticed when a grandchild was not quite well, a quality of quietness, a specific posture, a way of holding the spoon at dinner, before the child had registered it themselves, and well before any adult would have thought to look. She noticed the quality of silences and could tell you, with reasonable accuracy, whether a silence was comfortable or uneasy, generous or withheld. She also noticed the rain. More specifically, she noticed when the rain arrived at the wrong time, and the rain in the valley where she lived, a valley that caught weather the way a bowl catches water, holding it longer than the surrounding landscape, arrived at the wrong time with impressive consistency. It arrived during the harvest, specifically during the 2 or 3 critical days when certain crops needed to be brought in dry or not at all. It arrived during the village festival, which was held on the same dates every year and which the rain seemed to treat as a standing appointment. It arrived during the 2 days in spring when her family gathered from across 3 provinces. It arrived during the afternoons she had set aside for drying herbs, or mending things, or doing the long, slow outdoor work that required both dry weather and the specific quality of light that only came in certain seasons. The rain, Tao had concluded somewhere in her 30s, was poorly managed. She had not always been vocal about this. In her younger years, when the rain arrived inconveniently, she merely frowned at it through the window. By her 40s, she had begun to mutter. By her 50s, she had developed a full and nuanced vocabulary for the purpose. She did not shout. She was not a person who shouted, but there was a particular tone she had cultivated, flat and precise, and carrying the specific disappointment of someone whose reasonable expectations have been consistently failed, that she used to address the sky when the sky was not performing its duties correctly. Her husband, who had learned over 40 years to greet most of the world with the mild equanimity of a man who had decided not to take anything personally, sometimes woke on rainy nights to find her sitting at the window, conducting a one-sided conversation with the clouds. He never interfered. He had found, over many years, that some conversations needed to complete themselves without his participation. When Tao was 67, she slipped on a wet step and broke her wrist. The wrist healed cleanly over 8 weeks. But during those 8 weeks, she could not do many of the things she normally did. She sat more than she had sat in decades. She watched the garden. She watched the light change through the window at different hours. She watched the rain. It rained for 11 consecutive days, beginning 4 days after she broke her wrist. Her neighbors came to commiserate. The root vegetables were in serious trouble. The festival had been postponed. Everyone agreed that this was a great deal of rain, and poorly timed rain at that, and Tao sat at her window and looked at it. On the 3rd day, she said to the rain, "You are making things very difficult." The rain did not acknowledge this. On the 5th day, she said, "This is the worst spring I can remember." The rain continued at the same rate, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. On the 7th day, she said nothing. She simply looked. On the 9th day, something shifted. She had been sitting at the window since the early morning, her wrist aching in the particular way it ached when the weather changed, and she was watching the rain move across the fields to the east. And she noticed, without planning to notice, without intending to pay this specific quality of attention, she noticed the way it moved. It did not move uniformly. It came in curtains that shifted and varied, with dense centers and lighter edges, with gaps that opened briefly and then closed, the whole system in constant subtle motion that was nothing like the uniform gray sheet she had been registering for decades. It was alive in the way water is alive, always moving, always varying, never the same from moment to moment, even when it appeared to be the same rain. She noticed the color it made of the hills on the southern side of the valley. A green she could not name, not the bright green of early spring, not the dark green of full summer, but something between, a saturated depth that seemed to come from inside the vegetation rather than from the light falling on it, the green of things drinking after a long thirst. She found herself wanting, for the first time, to paint it. She did not paint. She had never painted, but the wanting was there. She noticed the sound. She had been hearing the rain for 9 days as a single sound. Rain, the way you hear traffic as traffic, rather than as thousands of individual things. But now she began to hear the distinctions. The soft, almost gentle percussion of rain on the broad squash leaves in the garden, which had a padded quality, a low, round sound. The sharper, cleaner note of rain against the stone path, almost musical, like an instrument being played by someone who didn't know they were playing. The long, low hiss of rain in the bamboo stand at the garden's edge, which never quite resolved into a melody, but never ceased to suggest one. She sat there until the light changed and her grandchildren called her for the midday meal, and she realized that 3 hours had passed and she had spent them in something that was not, upon reflection, entirely unlike pleasure. On the 11th day, the rain stopped. Tao sat at her window in the new silence, and she thought. She thought about the 9 days of looking, about what she had found in them, and she thought about the 30 years before them. The decades of argument and commentary, the carefully maintained dissatisfaction, the narrations delivered to weather that was not listening and had never listened and had never had any mechanism for listening. The rain had never once changed. That was the simple fact at the center of all of it. In 30 years of engagement, the rain had arrived when the conditions that produce rain arrived, had fallen at the intensity the conditions supported, and had stopped when the conditions changed. It had not consulted her schedule. It had not been negligent or malicious or careless or indifferent in any personal sense. It had only been rain. Rain doing what rain does, in the way rain has always done it, according to rules that were established long before any person in the valley was born, and would continue after all of them were gone. And she had spent 30 years, some portion of each rainy day, in friction with this, in a relationship of resistance with something that did not have the capacity to be in a relationship. The friction had not changed the rain. It had changed the experience of rain. It had made the rain a problem, a specifically personal problem. And all those years, the springs and autumns and the rainy festival weeks and the harvests complicated by water, all those years had also contained what she had found on the 9th day, the curtains moving over the fields, the color of the hills, the percussion on the squash leaves, the clarity on the stone path, the long, unresolved melody in the bamboo. Beauty that had been there the entire time, that she had been sitting beside without seeing because she had been sitting beside it while conducting an argument. She called her granddaughter that evening. The granddaughter was 14, patient in the specific way of people who have been listening to adults their whole lives. "I have been arguing with the rain for 30 years, Tao told her. "Did it ever work?" the granddaughter asked. "Never once," Tao said. "Then why did you keep doing it?" Tao thought about this. "I believed that my opinion of it mattered, that if I made my dissatisfaction clear enough, consistently enough, it would eventually accommodate itself, adjust. But it didn't. No, it didn't. It was rain, a pause. I have decided to stop." The granddaughter was quiet for a moment. "What will you do instead?" Tao looked out the window at the clean sky that follows 11 days of rain. "I will notice things," she said. "I have learned that I am quite good at noticing things when I am not busy arguing." In the years that followed, her neighbors sometimes found Tao standing in her garden in light rain, not arguing, not providing commentary, standing with her face turned upward slightly, looking at the sky with an expression that her husband eventually identified as interest. Pure, uncomplicated interest in what was happening. She was 89 when she died. On the day of her funeral, it rained. Her daughter said to the assembled family, she would have liked that. She would have noticed the way it sounded on the tent over the chairs, that particular low drumming. She would have watched how it fell through the bamboo at the edge of the yard. She would have seen what color it made of the hills. She would have found it, her daughter said, genuinely beautiful. Let us pause here for a moment. What are you arguing with tonight? What has arrived at an inconvenient time, or in an inconvenient form, or with an inconvenient consistency, and is receiving, in the hours before sleep, the narration of your dissatisfaction with it? The rain is not listening. It does not need to be changed. It only needs, perhaps, to be noticed differently, to be met with something other than friction. And in the space where the friction was, something might be waiting. Something that has been there all along, that you could not quite see because you were busy arguing. When you are ready, we will continue together. 5 stories. 5 ordinary people. One discovery arrived at 5 different times, through 5 different doors. Brother Ananda, who reached the temple on the far side of the mountain, lighter than he had started. Not because the mountain was smaller than he feared, and not because his concerns had been resolved, and not because someone had taken his burdens from him, but because he had finally looked at what he was carrying and asked the simple question, did anyone ask me to carry this? And found in the asking that the answer was no, that the mountain had been carrying itself as mountains always do, and that his hands, when he finally looked at them, were free to be empty. The cloud, who spent 11 weeks in the sky of the northern valley, being mountain-shaped in front of a mountain, useful, present, genuinely there, and discovered in the drifting east that she had never once stopped being exactly what she was, that a nature which moves is no less a nature than a nature which stands still, that the temporary is not the lesser, that her shape in the sky had been real for exactly as long as it lasted, and no less real for ceasing. Tae Yang, who spent a season in low-grade pursuit of a shape that moved whenever he moved, and stopped when he stopped, and learned in the garden of an old temple that the bothering was not in the shadow. The shadow was simply his shape, made of light, lying quietly on whatever ground he happened to be standing on. The bothering was in the chasing. The peace was in the stopping. Sister Min, who spent 81 years carrying the weight of responsibility and the fear of insufficient care, and discovered in her mid-70s that the fears had not changed a single outcome. That worry had never been a sentinel, that what lived beneath the long practice of fear was something too quiet and too spacious to be given a name easily, something with peace's texture and happiness's temperature that had been there all along beneath the freight of the vigilance. Tao, who stopped arguing with the rain and found, in the space where the argument had been, that she was very good at noticing things, that the rain she had been arguing with for 3 decades was beautiful in specific and varied ways that she had been sitting beside without seeing, that the friction had not been protecting her. It had only been using the space where noticing could have lived. What the weight of nothing means is this: the things that feel heaviest in the late hours, the conversations rehearsed, the outcomes dreaded, the selves we worry we are failing to be, the things we hold in the body's memory that the day's motion has only temporarily quieted. These things press, they insist, they have density and temperature and texture. They make themselves the center of things. And yet, when any person stops, as Taiyang stopped, as Ananda stopped on the mountain path, as Tao stopped on the 9th rainy day, and reaches into the center of the heaviness and looks, honestly, for what is actually there, they find thought, memory, anticipation, story, the feeling of a conversation that ended, and the physical memory of it, still held in the shoulders and the jaw, a fear about something that has not happened, kept warm by repetition, a worry that has been in the same position so long it has taken on the texture of fact, not stone, air shaped by the mind into the feeling of stone, because we have held it in the same position long enough that we have forgotten what we were doing with our hands. The weight of nothing does not require a resolution to release. It does not require that the problems be solved, or the fears be disproven, or the worries confirmed safe. It requires only what these 5 people found their way to, each in their own time, through their own particular door, arriving at the same simple clearing, noticing the weight is there. It is made of air, and the hand, when you finally look at it, has always already been empty. So let us come now to rest. Let the body find wherever it is most at ease, which it may have already found, because the body is often wiser than the mind about what it needs, and simply waits for the mind to stop offering instructions before it arranges itself appropriately. Perhaps the shoulders can soften, not through effort. There is no effort required here, no discipline to muster, no correct way to do this. Only a gentle noticing of wherever the body is still holding something that might, with the faintest permission, release. The way a held breath releases, not through force, but through the simple recognition that holding was optional, and a breath itself. You do not need to change it, or improve it, or breathe in any particular way tonight. Only perhaps notice it, the small rise and fall of the chest, or the belly, or wherever you feel it most clearly, the warmth of the exhale, the slight coolness at the edge of the inhale, where the air first enters. This has been happening without your supervision since you arrived in this life. It will continue happening while you sleep. It knows its business. You can let it. If thoughts come, and they may, because thoughts do not check the hour before arriving, they can be met the way Tao met the rain on the 9th day, with simple noticing, without the argument, without the belief that their presence requires your response, or that your response will change anything about them. A thought arrives. It is, as all thoughts are, made of the same substance as Ananda's extra rope, and the cloud's 11 weeks, and the shadow Te Yang could not catch, and Sister Min's long vigil, and Tao's decades of weather commentary. It is made of air, shaped by the mind, held in place only as long as you hold it. You do not have to carry it across a mountain tonight. You do not have to be the mountain it was looking for. You are lighter than any of that. You are carrying right now only what this moment actually contains, which is a room, the specific temperature of a room at night, a body at rest, a small, reliable, continuous movement of breath, the soft edges of a voice, carrying you through old stories that have already done whatever work they came here to do, the quiet that is gathering at the edges of everything, the way quiet always gathers when the day has finally run out of reasons to continue. Nothing is required of you tonight but this, being here, being already here, already arrived, already in the only place you have ever actually been, the weight. If there is weight, is made of air, and air, with time, and with the unhurried patience of a cloud who has stopped trying to be a mountain, simply rises. You have been generous tonight, with your time, your attention, your willingness to travel through old stories in search of something that was never very far. Whatever you arrived here carrying, carry it gently or set it down as feels right. There is no prescription. There is no correct way to end an evening. Only sleep, when sleep comes, finding you wherever you are, and the breath before it, and the quiet room that holds you both, without asking anything in return. Sleep well. And thank you for joining us here at Quiet